So, right now, millions of homeowners are probably parking their cars or, setting up patio furniture, maybe letting their kids play outside underneath these massive 1,000-pound biological structures. And the crazy thing is, these structures are quietly, like, completely invisibly rotting from the inside out.
Yeah, it's wild. We walk past towering oaks and maples every single
Yeah.
day, right?
Yeah.
But we just sort of tend to assume they are as permanent as a streetlight or a fire hydrant.
Right, just part of the scenery.
Exactly. But a mature tree is a highly dynamic, living system.
Hmm.
And when that system's structural integrity begins to fail, the results are, they are swift and usually catastrophic.
Definitely. So today for our deep dive, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of materials to figure out exactly when that beloved shade provider turns into, well, a severe liability.
We've got some really comprehensive stuff today: arboriculture guides, emergency response protocols, and some detailed landscape management briefings directly from tree care specialists in West Covina, California.
Which is super interesting. I mean, the West Covina environment is highly specific, right? Because they deal with extreme, prolonged drought and these really fierce seasonal winds.
Right, the Santa Ana winds. But
Right.
the fundamental physics and the biology of tree failure that they detail in these reports, they apply to anyone, anywhere, who has a massive tree towering over their roof.
Yeah, gravity works the same everywhere. So the mission for you today is to equip you with the exact knowledge required to spot the hidden indicators of a failing tree. Our primary focus is highlighting those undeniable warning signs that mean a tree requires immediate professional removal.
Because you really want to see the collapse coming long before the wood actually splinters.
Exactly. Saving your property, your bank account, and, potentially lives. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand when a tree absolutely needs to come down, we have to look past the pretty leaves and dig into the actual biomechanics holding that huge structure upright.
Yeah, and to do that, we have to start below the soil line. According to these arboriculture guides, the most dangerous structural decay is usually entirely invisible until the tree is, like, on the brink of complete collapse.
Which is terrifying.
It really is. Root rot is the primary culprit here. It acts as this completely silent killer.
And the irony here, the sources point this out, is that homeowners frequently cause this themselves by overwatering their lawns.
All the time.
Especially in arid climates where the native trees aren't even adapted to constant moisture.
Yeah, you are essentially drowning the tree's support system. Because, look, soil consists of these tiny pockets of air and water called macropores.
Okay, macropores.
Right. And roots actually need oxygen from those air pockets for cellular respiration. So when you overwater, you fill all the macropores with water, which creates this anaerobic environment.
Basically suffocating them.
Exactly. The roots suffocate, they die, and then specialized soil pathogens move in to just consume the decaying tissue.
So it's like a house, right? If the foundation is rotting underground, painting the walls, or, trimming the leaves, it isn't going to save the house. You end up with a root system that basically resembles wet cardboard.
That is a great analogy. And what's fascinating here is the biological timeline of that decay. Because the roots aren't just drinking straws pulling up moisture. They are literally structural tension cables holding thousands of pounds of wood against gravity.
Right, keeping it from falling over.
Exactly. So by the time you actually notice the soil heaving around the base of the trunk, meaning the earth is physically lifting or like bulging upward, the anchor is already snapped.
Wow. The sources actually stress that. They say a sudden lean in the trunk, combined with that heaving soil, it doesn't mean the tree is starting to fail. It means the failure has already happened.
Yeah, it's done. Gravity's just taking a minute to finish the job. The underground tension cables are just gone.
So at that stage, you're saying immediate professional extraction is the only safe option?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But root rot isn't the only base-level indicator. The trunk itself will actually project these distinct visual signs of structural compromise if you know what to look for.
Right, so we are looking for things like deep vertical cracks running down the main trunk, or peeling bark that exposes the inner wood, or this is a wild base that sounds completely hollow when you tap it.
The hollow sound is a huge red flag.
But the one that really stood out in the West Covina guides was fungal growth. Because, a lot of people see mushrooms growing near the roots and just assume, oh, it's a harmless byproduct of some recent rain.
Yeah, that is a massive and, frankly, very dangerous misconception. The mushroom or the fungal conch you see on the bark, that's just the fruiting body.
Just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. Think of it as the apple on an apple tree. The actual organism, the mycelium, is a vast network of microscopic threads deeply, deeply embedded inside the wood itself.
And those fungal threads aren't just, hanging out looking for a place to live. They are actively eating the tree, right?
Oh, they are actively digesting the structural cellulose and lignin. That's the stuff that gives the wood its load-bearing strength. Think of it like this lignin is like the concrete of the tree, and cellulose is the rebar.
Okay, I can picture that.
So the mycelium secretes these enzymes that dissolve the rebar, literally turning the solid pillars of the tree into a spongy mush.
That is disgusting, but amazing.
It is. If you see fungal fruiting bodies at the base of a mature tree, you are looking at visual confirmation of severe internal rot. The tree is literally being hollowed out from the inside.
Which naturally leads us to the next set of warning signs. Because if the base is turning to mush, it obviously can't pump water upward. The canopy is going to react to that.
Yeah, the canopy acts as this visual dashboard for the tree's internal plumbing. When the root system fails, the first place you see the deficit is thousands of feet in the air at the very tips of the highest branches.
Like the warning lights coming on. The guides highlight seeing massive dead branches lingering in the upper canopy, or maybe a sudden total browning of the leaves.
Yep, the dieback.
And most alarmingly, they mention a tree abruptly dropping extremely heavy load-bearing limbs on a perfectly calm day. No wind at all.
Yeah, and drought stress accelerates this mechanism dramatically. When a tree doesn't have enough water to sustain its entire mass, it initiates a process called canopy dieback.
How does that actually work mechanically?
Well, the suction force from the leaves pulling for water that isn't there, it actually creates air bubbles in the vascular tissue, which blocks the flow entirely. The tree essentially amputates its own extremities to preserve the core trunk.
Okay, but wait, if a tree is just dropping leaves or a few dead branches, how do you know it's a catastrophic failure and not just a tree being a tree? I mean, my oak tree in the backyard drops dead branches and leaves every single fall.
This raises an important question, and honestly, the distinction is critical for anyone managing a property. Routine seasonal shedding involves, like, small twigs, leaves, or minor secondary branches. It's just a normal metabolic process.
Okay, so a messy yard isn't necessarily a crisis.
Right. Systemic failure, on the other hand, involves primary scaffold branches. We're talking about the massive limbs that are thick enough to crush a car. If a limb that large is dying off, it means the main vascular system of the tree is profoundly compromised.
Got it. So shedding leaves is totally fine. Shedding a 1,000-pound branch means it's time to call a professional immediately.
Exactly. And the liability aspect here is immense. If a tree exhibits known, documented hazards, like deep trunk cavities or massive deadwood, and you just ignore them, you are stepping into a legal minefield.
I can imagine. You're lying in bed at 2 a.m., a storm rolls, and you hear that terrifying crack of timber snapping. If that compromised tree crashes through your neighbor's roof, you can't just throw up your hands and blame a freak act of nature.
No, you really can't. Because insurance companies investigate these claims thoroughly. They will literally send an arborist out to examine the broken wood.
Wow, like a forensic investigation for trees.
Pretty much. And if the wood is spongy and shows years of fungal decay, it wasn't an unpredictable act of God, it was negligence. You failed to address a visual hazard on your property.
And the environmental stressors just compound that risk so much. The West Covina specialists specifically highlight the Santa Ana winds. We are talking about incredibly dry, high-speed gusts pushing 60 to 70 miles per hour through the canyons.
Right. Think about the physics of that wind hitting a really dense canopy. A 50-foot tree acts as a massive mechanical lever. The canopy catches the wind, and that force multiplies as it travels down the trunk.
Applying immense torque to the root plate.
Exactly. And if the base is rotting, or the roots are suffocated by overwatering like we talked about, that torque will easily just rip the entire structure straight out of the ground.
And ironically, the roots themselves, just trying to survive, can be as destructive as the wind. As they desperately search for water, these expanding root systems can exert enough hydraulic pressure to crack a home's concrete foundation, crush underground plumbing pipes, and even heave up driveways.
Oh yeah. The hydraulic force of cell expansion in a growing root is astonishing. It's basically a slow-motion demolition that will eventually shatter solid concrete.
So once a tree crosses that line from, a beautiful asset to an active hazard, how do professionals actually intervene? Because firing up the chainsaw isn't always the very first answer, right?
No, not at all. The primary goal is usually preservation, assuming the structural integrity is still viable. So this involves routine pruning for structural correction or a highly specific technique called crown reduction.
Right. Crown reduction, which sounds like a royal demotion, but the guides explain it's purely about altering the physics of the tree.
Yeah, arborists will selectively remove branches at the top and outer edges to decrease the overall height and spread. But they aren't just making the tree smaller just to make it smaller. They are actually reducing the aerodynamic drag coefficient.
Basically making the sails smaller so the wind passes through harmlessly, rather than applying all that torque to the base.
Yes, exactly. It shortens the lever arm we talked about earlier, drastically reducing the mechanical stress on the trunk and roots during a storm. It allows the tree to flex safely without snapping.
Okay, but when the structural red flags are just too severe, like the fungus is eating the base, the roots are heaving, complete removal, and stump grinding are mandatory.
And the stump grinding is crucial. It prevents the dead wood from becoming this permanent staging ground for termites and carpenter ants.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. The pure mechanics of emergency removal. Let's say the worst happens. A massive trunk falls onto a house. How do you get it off without crushing whatever is left of the roof?
It's so tricky because the immediate instinct for an amateur might be to just climb up there and start cutting the log into smaller, manageable pieces.
Right, which seems logical.
Right, but that is exactly how secondary roof collapses occur. A fallen tree resting on a house creates a highly unstable load. Every single cut changes the weight distribution and the tension in the wood.
Wait, so if they aren't cutting it into pieces on the roof, how do they move a multi-ton log? The sources mention bringing in cranes, but how does a crane lift a tree of that size without tipping over or just crushing the driveway?
It requires incredibly precise load calculations. The arborists calculate the estimated weight of the wood based on the specific species and the trunk diameter.
Okay.
Then, the crane operator positions the machinery based on specific load charts. They extend these heavy outriggers onto protective mats to establish a super-wide, counterweighted center of gravity. Then they strap the massive trunk and pull it completely vertically.
Straight up into the air.
Straight up. By lifting vertically, they eliminate any horizontal drag or shifting. All that weight is transferred entirely to the crane suspension, which ensures the log doesn't roll or just crash right through the ceiling into the living room below.
That is wild. It's structural engineering applied on the fly. And even for a standing tree, taking down a decaying oak in a tight suburban space is a total high-wire act. The guides talk about using specialized friction devices to manage the descent of these massive limbs.
Yeah, they rely on tools like a porter wrap.
What is that?
It's a heavy steel bollard strapped to the base of the tree. When a climber cuts a 2,000-pound branch up high, the rigging rope isn't just held by some guy on the ground. It is wrapped around this steel bollard multiple times.
Oh, because if you just held onto a rope attached to a falling 2,000-pound log, it would instantly snap the line or, launch the ground worker into orbit.
Exactly. Total cartoon physics. The friction of the rope slipping against the steel bollard actually converts the kinetic energy of the falling wood into thermal energy. The bollard actually gets physically hot to the touch.
That's amazing.
And this allows a single worker on the ground to slowly, safely lower a massive limb with complete control, bypassing all the pristine landscaping and hardscaping below.
Which makes the idea of a homeowner attempting a DIY removal with, a wobbly ladder and a borrowed chainsaw look completely insane.
Beyond insane. The physics are incredibly unforgiving. A tiny miscalculation in the notch cut or the rigging setup can literally result in tons of timber swinging uncontrollably toward the house.
Right. And fast professional extraction actually helps with the insurance side, too. The guides note that emergency services provide the required documentation of the damage, and they immediately tarp the roof.
Which is vital. It mitigates further water damage, which is a strict requirement for filing a homeowner's insurance claim.
Because you have to prove to the insurer that you are actively managing the crisis and preventing secondary water damage.
Yes, but even when it's not a post-storm emergency, you can't simply wake up on a Tuesday and decide to cut down a 50-foot oak on a whim. The permitting process is a significant hurdle.
Oh, totally. The West Covina municipal codes are incredibly strict about this. You often need formal city approval, especially if you are dealing with what they call a heritage tree.
Right. A heritage tree is typically defined by the municipality based on specific metrics. Often, it's the diameter at breast height, or DBH. If the trunk is over a certain thickness, say 24 inches, or if it's a historically significant native species like the coast live oak, it is fiercely protected.
And additionally, if the tree sits in the public right-of-way near the sidewalk, the city views it as a shared municipal asset.
Because it impacts ambient neighborhood temperatures and local air quality. So you absolutely need a professional to navigate that red tape to avoid massive fines.
But sometimes taking down a tree is actually the most responsible thing you can do for the local ecosystem. The guides compare it to weeding a garden, but on a giant neighborhood scale.
I love that analogy. If we connect this to the bigger picture, strategic removal is a vital landscape management tool. When a yard is heavily overgrown, you have multiple massive root systems engaged in this fierce, silent war beneath the soil.
They are fighting over a finite pie of soil moisture, sunlight, and limited nutrients.
Exactly. By extracting a declining or hazardous specimen, you instantly reallocate that resource pie. You eliminate the harmful competition, which allows the surrounding vegetation to finally access the moisture and nutrients they desperately need to thrive.
And the sources also emphasize disease control. If you leave a dying tree standing that's riddled with wood-boring insects or aggressive fungal pathogens, you're basically hosting a staging ground for a neighborhood-wide infestation.
It becomes a biological vector.
Right.
Removing the diseased plant physically breaks the cycle of infection. It stops the pathogens from jumping to the healthy trees in your yard and even your neighbors' yards.
And it gives the healthy trees the spatial freedom to develop symmetrical canopies, which ultimately makes them more aerodynamic and resistant to those high Santa Ana winds we discussed earlier. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who's maybe surveying your own property right now?
It means canopy management is essential risk management. Addressing structural decay early secures the long-term viability of your urban forest and protects your financial assets from entirely preventable disasters.
So let's quickly recap those primary warning signs that require immediate professional removal. If you see a sudden lean accompanied by heaving soil at the base, or deep vertical cracks in the trunk, massive, dead, load-bearing branches in the canopy, or fungal fruiting bodies feeding on the roots, well, the time for routine pruning has definitely passed.
The structural tension cables are failing, and the wood is turning to mush.
Maintaining vigilance is the absolute key here. Don't wait for a 2 a.m. windstorm to test the structural integrity of a rotting tree.
Absolutely. And as we consider all of this, it leaves us with something pretty critical to ponder about the future of our urban landscapes. We've talked extensively today about the immense damage caused by shifting climates, prolonged droughts, and fierce wind events.
And those environmental stressors are only accelerating.
Exactly. Which really forces us to ask, are the species of trees we are planting today entirely unsuited for the environmental realities of the future?
Wow.
When we plant a tree, we are making a 50 to 100-year commitment. Could today's popular, water-hungry ornamental sapling become tomorrow's guaranteed hazard as the climate continues to dry and winds intensify? We might really need to radically rethink what a resilient, safe yard looks like over the next century.
That is a brilliant point to leave off on. The beautiful sapling we plant today could easily become the liability of tomorrow simply because the climate around it shifted. It really drives home why we have to stop looking at our landscaping as a static picture and start treating it like the dynamic structural system that it is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep an eye on those roots, stay safe, and we will catch you next time.